yeah, I think yeah, we just have an informal talk today with Jonathan and discover what we're doing, like each other.
Introductions.
Jonathan is discover what we're doing, introductions, and we'll see where Jonathan is coming from and what he's doing. And maybe we can work together. Let's see.
Okay.
Yeah. So I guess maybe Jonathan, if you want to start, just say something of what you're working on, your background.
Yeah, I'll start, and you guys can ask questions. We can go from there. I'm a software engineer, like I think all of you, or so I most recently worked at ZipRecruiter, and we just went public. I left actually ZipRecruiter a couple years ago, and with the idea, first, just to have a little bit of freedom, but second, so I haven't been working for 2 years on anything except for this idea, and my idea very much overlaps with all of your ideas, I believe. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the idea, but I have been basically studying. I've decided to give myself time to study, write, develop concepts, with the goal of crafting a vision that is compelling enough and concrete enough and clear enough that I can actually go to venture capitalists and or potential co-founders and say, here's the vision, here's what I want to build. And it's something I've been thinking about for like a lot of you, like for at least a decade, at least bits and pieces of the general idea. So the general idea, as I put it now, is I want to create technologies that make conversations on the internet more intelligent and more reasonable, that create an environment that promotes the spread of accurate information instead of misinformation, civility, the collaborative discovery of knowledge, very much the opposite of what you see online now. And I think that there are reasons that social platforms today tend to create these very negative social outcomes. There's a combination, a complex interaction between the rules of software, of technology, and human beings and human nature. And it creates a dynamic that arrives at an equilibrium where people learn that certain types of behavior, certain types of content will be rewarded and amplified in certain contexts. And by rewarded, I mean people are looking for something when they're participating, when they're engaging on the internet. They're looking for information. Sometimes they're looking for attention, validation, influence. Sometimes they're just looking to get traffic to their website for commercial reasons. And so looking at what's happening almost from the point of view of game theory, you can see why certain dynamics will occur. And I think that you can not only understand the dynamics that occur, but I think it's possible to intentionally engineer social platforms that result in more positive dynamics. So that's my big, broad thesis. And then the details, of course, how you actually engineer this dynamic it's an incredibly gigantic problem. But I have some beginnings of ideas. And again, I think there's a lot of similar thinking and between that we all have. But that's my general thesis.
Awesome, thanks for sharing that. So you're thinking that you're going to be looking for VC type funding as opposed to like bootstrapping or other forms?
Not necessarily VC funding, no. So I have some funds of my own that I've been using for whatever small expenses I've incurred, and it would be great if I could, if I'm going to actually do a startup, and that's not necessarily my plan. So I'm not even sure I want to start the next billion-dollar social platform necessarily, or something that's going to make a lot of money. What I want to do is help realize this idea, help basically somehow contribute to making conversations on the internet more intelligent, to making the world more reasonable, using socio-technical engineering. And that might be, I feel like it might be just, my biggest contribution might be just writing or consulting, and I might join an existing project. I might eventually, maybe I could convince Twitter to change some of their algorithms and features. There's lots of ways I might contribute. But step one, I think, is to really articulate my ideas. Now, I've not published anything, and the reason is, in a sense, I'm very hesitant to make any announcement to all my former colleagues, all my friends and family, saying, this is what I'm building, until I have a really coherent story. And I believe that my ideas are becoming more and more coherent all the time. But this is such a complex problem. There's just so many different, there's so many different academic fields that I've been researching that contribute to my thinking. And I've been, for example, researching argumentation theory. And there's whole journals on argument and computation, for example. And so there's just so much to know. And so my ideas are still evolving, except for they are converging, because they're changing more and more slowly every day. And there's a few big ideas that I think I'm able to articulate well. I've avoided publishing them. I showed Felix some of the essays that I written, which I will publish after I've gotten some more feedback. But I've only showed them from people that select group of like-minded people that I want to help me refine them before I start publishing my ideas. But as for VC, I've been in a startup, a few startups. I know it's much better to avoid taking any sort of funding, as long as you can.
Yeah, I just want to get a feel from you on that, because that gives us a quick feeling on your mindset coming in. Go ahead, Marc-Antoine.
Yeah, I totally sympathize with the don't publish until you have a clear idea. I've been also mulling it for way too long. And for me, it's very clear that I want everything I do, to be adopted. And that does mean for me not commercial, because VCs want a silo and they want to capture the audience. And that means it's creating a closed ecosystem. And for me, it has to be about creating bridges between ecosystems so that the ideas are not restricted to a sub-community at a fundamental level. But that means the question of the business model is highly, highly problematic. I don't have an answer there. Right now, I'm just trying to solidify my thoughts as well. One thing that had me back off a bit was the issue of game theory, because I totally believe that game theory is a very, very, very bad model of how people behave. But there is certainly a lot of fascinating work on incentives and gamification that I think is germane. One thing I'm working on that I don't talk about too much here on CDL is my colleague Jack Park is trying to gamify co-construction of large structured conversations, like IBIS conversations. In this case, I'm looking at enriching that beyond IBIS.
Such as what? I didn't hear.
Sorry, he's working with the IBIS model, where basically it's questions. You have issues or questions, and then you have proposed answers. And then you have pros and cons, arguments, pros and cons, each proposal. But it's a recursive in the sense that, of course, each argument can have pros and cons, counter argument, but each proposal or argument can raise a new issue or a new question. So it's very open-ended. It's not just pro-con. It's very, let's have a conversation about this. So it's less purely in the decision space and more. But IBIS has limitations. It's just a proven model. It's being used a lot. It works really well if you have a good curator, which I guess is true of many systems, but certainly it's more true of that than, well, we don't have many systems that work without somebody who understands the system. without curation. Now, can we crowdsource curation is one of the questions we keep asking ourselves. In purely pro-con vision, it's easier, but then I don't think that this helps converge as much as more open-ended schemas. So anyway, that's not the point. I'm not speaking about IBIS versus other models here. What I'm saying is Jack is looking at, can we crowdsource construction and curation of a large-scale conversation? And what are the gamification tactics for that? So, but where I'm more contributing and more active in the CDL is how can we disambiguate and in Tim's terms have more canonical, like how do we deduplicate? And deduplication means a bit of formalization so that we know, hey, this is the same concept as that, or it's entailed by that, or it's part of what we mean by that. And how can we use that to simplify the otherwise overwhelming map of possible options and opinions and arguments and claims. So that's what we're discussing here. My image is frozen for myself. I don't know if it's frozen for you.
It's also frozen for me.
It is, yeah.
Either that or you're speaking very well without moving your lips. Wow.
Okay. Zoom is behaving. My computer is behaving. It seems to do that a lot these days. Let me try. Does that help?
Yep.
Yes.
Yep.
I'd also mention, Marc-Antoine, your background, sometimes the algorithm that blurs your background causes a part of your body to briefly disappear.
That's
creates an overall effect that's kind of psychedelic, like a movie where someone's like on a drugs. And
yes. Yeah,
So-
I have much more to say, but yeah, let me start with that. Yeah.
I think that question of deduping, it sounds like, I think that's a really hard question. Wikipedia seems to have done a pretty good job with it, and with the disambiguation and deduping, and that I think is crowdsourced.
It's easier with themes and entities than with claims.
Yeah, I think so. And claims are made in context.
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
part of what you're trying to achieve with deduping might be achieved kind of naturally just with linking. So that is to say, if I make a claim and now I'm trying to justify that claim. So let's say we create a website, or one of us creates like a WikiFact website, and you put a claim and people debate whether that's true or not, maybe something that's been said in the news. And so now those claims, or the a centralized claim database. So now you got a URL for a claim, and we can identify the claims that have been extensively debated, the top claims, and they're the first one that'll show up on Google search. So climate change is caused by human beings. There might be 10 versions of that claim somewhere, but there might be one kind of top claim. And then if in another conversation somewhere on a blog or something, someone says, enters the argument, climate change is caused by human beings, maybe word is slightly different. They could also add as support for that claim a link to the top canonical claim from this database. And what you've done there is not necessarily deduped, but you've just said, here, this is the only supporting argument I'm making. This claim basically is supported by this other claim, and in a sense that implies that they're almost that I'm acknowledging that this is a duplicate.
I have so much more to say about this,
And
but
I'm
I think
out loud too. So,
but I think we should have everybody give a bit of a turn, and then we can dig deep into one of them.
Yeah, I have a couple more questions, but I've been hogging a bit. So I don't know, Steven, Felix, if y'all have anything.
Yeah, I think you two guys go ahead, because I already had a one-on-one session with Jonathan.
Go ahead, Bentley. I don't have any questions right now.
So I don't know,
about
Jonathan, if you
Socrates. Oh, sorry.
yeah, you tell us about Socrates. But another community that you might find interesting with similar passions is the Open Global Mind. With some of us, it's really kind of a much broader based community because they're doing everything from communications to also like food security and racial inequity and stuff like that. But the passionate people, they're donating time to try and solve these large problems, and we're not officially, but we're kind of a subset of that. So that'd be something. And openglobalmind.com is a good place to start.
Okay.
And one of our projects that you might find interesting also, yeah, Mark Antoine mentioned Kiko Lab. They're a member of Open Global Mind. Awan's project sounds kind of similar to where you are as well.
Which project?
I don't remember the name. He changed the name of that project. And then I guess I'd like to find out from you, Jonathan. First of all, if you're willing to share those essays in here, I think we'd be a nice group that we know it's not done, so we won't hold you to anything you say.
Mm-hmm.
And then we will also probably break it and make you rethink everything,
Sounds great.
which could be good or bad. But I know that's the problem. We all come to here and we have great, we think we know what we're doing, and then in the middle of the conversations, our brains are blown.
Yeah.
But I would like to read those, and if you're open to any feedback.
I'm curious as well. I'm really curious about the incentives talk, because it's not easy. One thing I should have mentioned is, but you say you've seen some of our conversations, so I don't know how much, because there's many hours of our conversations. But one principle, like we are very interested collectively in deduplication, but we're also very interested in progressive formalization. Formalization can help deduplication, but we don't expect, like, formalization is hard, it's a skill, and it's harder to agree on formalization than to agree on other things. So on the one hand, we want formalization. On the other hand, we want to allow informal input from untrained people. And then someone else can make it more formal, so that you have more community curation with different levels of curation ability. So that's one common assumption we have. Like, we can't expect everybody to know how to make a perfect rational argument.
Yep.
But we expect many people to have something to contribute, even if they don't know a given methodology. That's one of the few things we really agree on. Even the what's the role of crowdsourced versus more trained curators is, we have conversations with one other group, which is Society Library, and they're very much betting on curators to have a map of opinions and ideas. So that's another conversation again. But yeah, incentives, I'm curious.
Well, so thoughts on incentives. First of all, there's incentives to participate. Social networks have kind of got that down, and much of their technology, it seems, is about incentivizing people to participate, regardless of the quality of that participation. And at least there's a lot of people out there that believe that that's the cause of a lot of society's problems. And anything that's more formalized and structured and that requires more knowledge is going to disincentivize participation from the common human being. So I think progressive formalization is a great way to address that. If we can create lower friction ways of people that allow people to participate, and then I see your comment there, Marc Antoine. So, okay, that's a great question. So you see what I'm saying, that progressive formalization partly solves that problem. But the other part of incentives is incentives for rationality. So I think any online community has the problem of, if it's open, once it's open to random people on the internet, you've got potentially big problems. And you have people who are acting in bad faith, and it's very easy for a very small number of these people to take over community. Now, even if you're able to defend against the civil attacks, as they're called, identify bots, even real human beings, often in the context of an internet conversation, act in bad faith. You lose a lot of the social feedback that exists in a conversation with people that in a room, where you're held accountable for being at least a little bit reasonable, especially if you can create anonymous accounts, even if you're a real person. And so you have a problem with incentivizing essentially good behavior, rationality. And I think that the one solution is, so I read Felix's article on moderation. And he talked about how in many online communities that have, and I don't know if you specifically mentioned this, but many online communities have karma systems and reputation systems. And the dynamics of those reputation systems, and this is where I think game theory at least is informative, because game theory can explain why you get these systems settle into an equilibrium where certain norms and standards and values will self-propagate within that community. And you can explain it based on the incentives of reputation and game theory. You can explain it as a Keynesian beauty contest where everybody behaves the same way everybody else behaves because the system incentivizes you behaving the same way as the majority. And that's a system with multiple equilibria. But once an equilibrium has been arrived at, an equilibrium around a certain norm, you can say this sort of thing or you can't say this sort of thing, that can be very stable. And I think that might be, so that's one possible solution to the problem of incentives to behave rationally. Is it possible to create an equilibrium around rational behavior? And that I think actually is possible, although there are different standards and definitions of rational behavior. I think you can intentionally engineer an equilibrium around rationality.
I have one other question to divert from that topic, because I do think it'd be interesting to get deep into that. But I find it interesting, since we're kind of working together, I was going to ask, or considering working together and how we can work together, and Jonathan, a lot of our ideas do overlap. It'd be interesting to kind of know what other skills you feel like you have, so we could figure out how we kind of can work together and have our skills overlap. And maybe if it's helpful to you to kind of, we could go around and kind of say what we each think we bring to the table. So as we collaborate, one of the things I kind of like doing is, even if we don't end up joining another project, us kind of jumping in and helping each other's project in with our specific skills is often a lot of fun and a great way to enhance our own projects.
All right. So I'm a software engineer. I was a principal engineer at ZipRecruiter. So I have experience in a number of technologies, all mostly web-based. ZipRecruiter is an online job board, job search engine. I've been coding since I was 16. I got my first job as a coder. Most recently, it's been the Go language, which I actually really like and find to be very productive. But data analysis and product development. So my role has often been in product rather than engineering. I've also been a manager. I am a thoroughly adequate but not great manager. One thing that I've learned is that I do not manage engineers who I don't think are better engineers than me. And I just eventually, that's my weakness as a manager. And like a lot of engineers, I prefer to be an engineer. I think I have, I think I would describe myself as an idea person. So I think one of the ways I was able to contribute the most at ZipRecruiter is because I was able to span and from small technical implementation details to broad business goals. And I was able to, I think I'm good at articulating ideas and documenting them. And that's and I'm a bit of a philosopher, and that's my career in a nutshell.
Cool.
That's great.
I think all of us have some software engineering. Almost all of us. Am I right, Felix? I don't remember.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, we all do some coding, some more than others. I've professionally coded for a long time, 30 years, and managed teams, more on the product side. I've also been mentoring startups. So I get into VC, how to get VC funding, pitch decks, business models and stuff, and then marketing and content marketing, just, and the T skills. Software developing is deep, and then shallow on all this other stuff, but useful. So yeah, but yeah, so I don't know if other people want to chime in as well, but I'm trying to look for people who do writing. And you just mentioned that you're really good at putting ideas together and stuff like that. So that might be something interesting for us to collaborate on. But
Yeah, and I'll give you guys access to my essays, and you can decide whether about my writing skills.
40 years of coding, Marc-Antoine.
beat me by 10.
Yeah, not bad.
But that's just because he's older. That's not fair.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
I can't catch up. There's no way. I'm getting a higher percentage every year. That's the important thing.
Yeah, started at 14, 15. Yeah, so yeah.
I started about the same age.
Yeah, being the oldest guy, I get the most years. I may have been coding less continuously than others because I did stop a bit during my bachelor's and stuff. So, but nonetheless, I never studied coding formally though, or any computer science. It's all self-taught.
Yeah, I'm self-taught myself.
Okay, I have a computer science degree,
Yes,
so I actually went through it. Yeah.
You're the most formally trained of us three. I don't know about Stephen and Jonathan.
I have a PhD in computer science.
Okay.
I have a bachelor's of computer science and an MBA.
Cool. Not bad. Yeah.
Yeah, so I guess I have a PhD in computer science, specialization in human computer interaction. It focuses more on like requirement solicitation, incorporating the user in, trying to understand what their actual needs are. So yeah, I really prioritize understanding requirements, because you can be as good a developer as you want to be. If you don't know what you're implementing, you can't get anywhere. So that's my primary focus. I've been doing that 12 years professionally, 20 years as a hobby and on the side, etc. Yeah, I think that's a quick summary. And as part of this group, I came in here I was trying to get a research grant to continue some work I was doing on the side. That didn't happen. I now decided to leave academia and instead just keep doing it on the side as a hobby. And my primary goal is really to get these tools out there that I published for the past 20 years or something in research and get them into hands of actual users, because all the tools that Arctech and stuff is pumping out, it's not tailored to the end user that like you described, is visiting a website and actually wants to start adding a claim to have more useful debate online. So that's my primary take.
So, Felix, it's your turn next, but I just wanted to comment. So, academia, I got my bachelor's in computer science, but recently I have been feeling so much the lack of postgraduate computer science training. I've been reading a lot of academic papers, and I realize I don't really even know how to write an academic paper. And I realize there's a lot of skill there. And I actually would like to. I think there's some of my ideas that I've kind of formulated into a shape what seems like it could be a good paper. One thing I'm looking for is potential collaborators with that. Someone who has published and knows how to get published, knows how to structure a paper, and knows the right people to cite, all that. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, I could help there. I published 4 papers already. I also wanted to do my PhD, but then didn't get any funding, and the whole academic system just didn't work out for me. Then I quit and tried to start a startup, which also didn't work out. And now I have a contract job part-time and try to work on a lot of my own projects in the free time of that. Oh.
Yeah. I studied other things, as I said, neurobiology and math at the bachelor's level, and my master's is more it was more sociology of consensus. And that's why I'm quoting Heath right now on the question of game theory.
I would really like to talk to you in more depth about that, Marc-Antoine, if you have some time. So what you just posted there, that's a quote?
It's a book reference.
Okay, yeah, I'd love to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely would love to. Maybe not today, but yeah, sure. Let's set aside time to do that. I would love to. The one I may not have the formal computer science training, but I have let's say a strong bachelor's in mathematical logic, which is a perspective I bring a lot here. the mathematical logic.
Yeah, one thing I've been studying and only have a very surface understanding of is ideas of non-monotonic logic, and then argumentation frameworks from AI, and how they relate to non-monotonic logic. And I was trying to explain this all to Felix, and it's also new to me, but I feel like these are very valuable concepts.
Yeah, the AI history, I wish I knew better than I do. I know things, but there's many important things I don't know. It's a big field. There are things I know, but yeah, I haven't used data log or these classic systems. I know of them. Right. And I've studied them a bit, but from the outside, not from having gotten really familiar with them. And that's a lack in my education. I know that Stephen and Felix probably have at least done Prolog as part of their formal studies.
First semester.
Not formal, but as a hobby on the side.
Yeah, I'm mostly into functional programming, if that's interesting to anyone, and algorithms, making things fast.
I definitely am a fan of functional programming, although not a fan of exclusive functional programming. For example, I don't find Haskell to be a very productive language.
Yeah, I can agree there.
Yeah, I'm mostly focusing on prototyping front ends because that's a great way to kind of test out these ideas.
Yeah. Do you feel like you have good prototyping skills?
Yeah, maybe to the exclusion of being able to actually put a product out. Like I could whip together a prototype pretty quick. And I'm also doing a lot of stuff in the no-code space. So there will be times that will be like, well, for this sort of project, we don't even need to write code. You just pull up Webflow or something like that and have something done in short order. A lot of the stuff we do can do that, but other stuff. And I do prototypes for startups. So. And I haven't, yeah.
Well, one weakness I have is not prototyping, but it is designing beautiful user interfaces. I feel like it's almost a blindness. They just look awful. They work, but
same.
It's difficult. I think I get along, but it's not that great as when I receive a design from a designer, I say, oh yes, right, that's much better.
Yeah.
But
exactly why.
Well, yeah, so there's the design and then the user experience. So I think I'm pretty good at the user experience, and I think a lot of us would kind of feel that way too. And then for the design, I do have like font blindness. Like I can't tell the difference between Times New Roman and some sans serif font. I just have to look and say, oh, do they have the serifs? Okay. But so I can implement the UIs, and oftentimes I'll have some designer friends that'll help me out with. But if the UX is there, and then you just, a lot of times for our quick experiments, just using Bootstrap or some kind of pre-built or Tailwinds or something like that, you can get something that looks decent without having to know design these days. And then, yeah, if you wanted to commercialize it or have people pay for it, then you need to get a designer.
Yeah, that said, my website looks great because I just used one of those. I used Jekyll.
Oh yeah,
a really beautiful Jekyll theme, and everything looks nice. But, you know, I wouldn't know how to create that theme.
Yeah, since we're throwing skills around, yeah. Bentley, you wanted to say something?
I was just saying I'm playing with it and trying to learn. I've taken some courses in design just to improve. I don't think I'll ever be good as someone who's dedicated their time on that, but enough to get something that looks good enough that we can get some lessons from it is kind of my specialty.
Yeah, just want to say what came to my mind is I did some crypto, but not the whole blockchain stuff, but actual crypto, which is actual crypto. But yeah, like I have a bit of theory background. I come from computer graphics. That's also sometimes relevant. From like how to do something on a GPU, how to do some graphics calculation. For example, I did a lot of graph visualization myself, like the actual simulations, how nodes repel and then intersections and so that kind of stuff. Yeah, just want.
Oh, and as an aside, I'm fairly good at 3D modeling and 3D animation.
Interesting.
But I don't think that's real useful here.
Yeah.
Well, if we ever need a video or something.
Yeah. I did build, so Gollybot's my project, and it's a character, a robot. So I do have him in 3D that I'm gonna make some videos with. So it's a matter of time.
So Gollybot sounds like it's just the thought I wanted to share with you is it seems like it is an example or an instance of non-monotonic logic. What
I was looking up non-monotonic logic because it's one of those words that Marc-Antoine keeps throwing around. And I can never, for some reason, get it, but defeasible logic and probably. Yeah, the main thing about Gollybot is the thing that I'm focused on in our space is a scoring mechanism that is not based on popularity. Where people affect the score by modifying or adding more claims. And so it kind of forces people to not dismiss someone's argument because it's in there and it changes the score until you put a reason for it not change the score.
Yep.
And then there's no
that's
curation.
Basically defeasible. That's basically defeasible logic,
okay.
Right?
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. I keep kind of reading it. And
it's kind of the big assumption. If you read, so I was talking about these argumentation frameworks. So there's the Dung argumentation framework, which is the most influential in computer science, like a Thai scholar called Dung in 1995. And he basically started out the same way. So reasonable people, you know, they give reasons for you to believe or not believe something. And we assume that you're either going to accept that reason and say, oh, okay. You know, like the example I give in one of my essays is I say, you know, we make a vote, where should we go to lunch? We vote for Dino's. And I say, well, Dino's is closed. The assumption is that reasonable people will accept my argument or give a reason not to. You know, and you can respond, no, Dino's reopened yesterday or something. But if you don't respond, it's not reasonable now. Or the reasonable thing for you to do is accept the argument. And I think that's a really important insight that I'm actually seeing in a lot of places. I think that's kind of the insight behind Gollybot, these argumentation frameworks. And I feel like then, so I think you should read my essay on the deliberative poll because I think it provides, you know, a potential scoring mechanism that might be the same scoring mechanism as Gollybot. And the idea is, okay, let's not just get people's initial vote, their initial vote, where should we go to lunch? Well, Dino's. Let's get the vote and see what the group thinks after they've been presented with the arguments. And you can look at it in terms of probability. The probability that people will vote for Dino's not knowing anything is this. The probability that people will vote for Dino's knowing that it's closed is that. The probability that they'll vote for Dino's knowing that someone said it was closed, but someone else said it reopened is that. And you can actually now, one way of looking at it is you can say, okay, now what would a reasonable person within this group, so you assume that the group is reasonable, that's an assumption that we have to deal with incentives and figure out how we come up with how you can create a situation where
reasonable and not adversarial. Also, there's those are two different criteria, right?
Right, with different preferences. But you can say, even if not everybody even follows the whole conversation, which is often what will happen, right? Someone will comment Dino's is closed, but the vote already happened because these conversations are asynchronous, which is, I think, a big problem. But people don't go back and change their vote. And so now these votes are based on ignorance. And what you can do is say, okay, well, what would, given the data we have, what's the probability that the average person in this group would vote for Dino's had they follow this entire conversation thread? And I think you can actually, you can come up with a formula and objectively estimate that probability.
That's an interesting perspective. I've never heard that one. Estimating the probability of, a conditional probability of making a certain choice given new information that was not available given an earlier choice.
So for example, our data could be the initial vote was, 70-30. So that's a piece of data. And we're dealing with small sample sizes. So you have to do some statistical computation that accounts for that, right? So that then maybe only of the original 100 people that voted, 70-30, maybe only 20 people see the response, the comment, Dino's is closed. But of those 20 people, 19 change their vote, or at least they don't say, oh, I still want to go to Dino's. Right?
And you could look at people who did change their vote based on the new information to get an estimate of that probability. Right?
Exactly, and you can combine the probability if it's a small sample size, and even a small sample size tells you something. If 2 out of the 2 people that saw that comment change their vote, I think that you can come up with some statistical justification for kind of a blended score.
Very interesting. That's an approach I had not considered. I find it extremely interesting. The one thing I believe strongly is not using a single axis of truth, likely, unlikely, because I'm very interested in collective intelligence, and that means I'm interested in distinguishing consensus from controversial statements. So basically, each statement would have how much is it believed, how much is it disbelieved on another axis. So if it's neither believed nor disbelieved, it's open question. If it's both believed and disbelieved, it's highly controversial. And if it's either mostly believed or mostly disbelieved, then we know there's consensus for or against that statement.
Okay. That's a bit of a mind twister, so I'll have to think more about that. Okay, yeah, I guess that makes sense. If the people that express an opinion are expressing both types of opinions, it's controversial.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then you can look, how many, is it a significant or is it just a fringe, right? You can get numbers into that, which is kind of another axis. And, how strongly do they believe it and how many people? But the idea is if an idea is really controversial, then it's the one that's actually splitting the community. You want to spend time resolving it or finding a ways to go around the issue, because it's the one that's splitting the community, as opposed to one that's an open question or one everybody agrees to. Or one
only semi-unrelated. That's why I think it's part of the base layer, expressing belief. But if you don't, for me, expressing belief is really essential. Just what I'm saying, because of that reason, is just summed up Mark and point.
You're saying expressing belief is really essential?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm surprised.
For me, it's fundamental. Why are you surprised? We had a discussion a couple of meetings ago where
No, that's true.
I was arguing belief should be in the base layer or not.
That's true. I forgot that. Sorry.
Yeah, and
So-
Jonathan, sorry. Yeah.
Oh,
Just Jonathan, I think you're aware that most of the time right now, like our current direction is like trying to find a very expressive argumentation model.
Mhm.
I sent you the diagram.
Yep.
Yeah, and yeah, usually we're diving into one topic and find that we don't really understand it and dig very deep, like several sessions. And it's to actually, and we're trying to push through to actually come to a result. And we have like many open-ended discussions right now, like open threads we didn't finish yet. That's one thing. And I just like, yeah, doing the frame. We're talking 3 times a week, and like every day someone else hosts the discussion.
Mhm.
Like on Tuesdays, it's usually Tim. On Wednesday, it's now me or Steven right now. And on Fridays, it's usually Marc-Antoine.
It's a rotating benevolent dictator. So
Yeah, right.
they
Because
can steer the meeting.
we figured out in the beginning that we were not able to agree on one single process because there was a lot of frustration there. And then we decided, okay, let's follow several processes in parallel, because different reasonable people think different things are right to do. So let's follow all of them.
You mean processes for running a meeting?
Exactly, like, or which process do we have to develop the argumentation model? Like, do we do a bottom up or a top down approach?
Right.
Or do we do bounded context or whatever? To name a few. Yeah.
Speaking of which, by the way, I can't make it tomorrow. So it's all you, Felix, or maybe Jonathan, if you have an idea to discuss something tomorrow.
So the host sets the topic?
Yeah, usually, but we introduced the Wednesday one for me to talk about a curation and like community moderation, like the document I sent you. But this I don't know, we didn't talk about that a lot anymore and focused more on the argumentation model. So there's no, usually we decide on the agenda like in the meeting, or if there's something special, we just announce it. But it's pretty open.
yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
We were supposed to be working today on use cases again. We've gone back and forth from use case conversation. We all agree it's important, but sometimes we felt we needed to get that more at the data layer and more at the use case layer, or more at the, when I say data layer, sometimes it's very computer science driven, but sometimes it's very philosophic driven. What do we mean by the concept?
Yeah, I mean, what we could do is expose Jonathan to the open problems we have and see if he has different answers.
Yeah, that sounds like actually a very good use of tomorrow.
So
maybe I could study some of the open problems. Certainly, I have tons of thoughts about moderation. One of the essays I'll send is based on that. I don't know if that's still open. It sounds like your document, Felix, it's short, but it lays out, I think, a lot of good principles. Is there, how open are those questions still?
Yeah, so last time I thought it was not finished because I was thinking a lot about denial of service attacks, and then a friend of mine told me leave denial of service out of the whole thing, because this doesn't destroy the system. It doesn't hurt the system. It just like does not make it progress. So I have to rethink that, for example, because I think before that I thought it was an issue, but
do you
yeah.
Are you thinking denial of service attacks, not Sybil attacks, to be clear?
Yeah, kind of like people proposing changes or proposing edits to a system, and if they're like too many proposals. Like if every new account can propose arbitrary many changes, then you have the real information is drowned in nonsense proposals.
So I think, speaking about academic papers, I think the general principles in your document could be a good paper with a little bit more detail on this idea of a multiple communities, you know, where I think that's also a great idea, right? You can, you know, the way I think of it is, you know, you might have trust networks, and there's a lot of academic work on this, where, you know, there's people in my social network that I either explicitly trust because I friended them or whatever, or implicitly trust because of some sort of similarity. Like they tend to share my idea of what is rational. And by the way, you know, we can measure rationality different than how similar I am to someone in how we think about what's reasonable differently than we can measure on how similar am I to belief. Because if we are reasonable in the same way, it means that we're likely to agree after seeing all the arguments, even if we disagree initially. And I think that's an important thing to consider. In any case, you know, collaborative filtering is the general idea of, okay, let's take somebody that's, you know, purchased the same products as me or watched the same videos as me, use that to establish some sort of similarity measure. And then you can traverse a network. I'm similar to you, you're similar to this other person. And then you can kind of create clusters of people that are similar. And so that's one way of addressing moderation. You know, in a social network, moderation might just be flagging content that's unacceptable, you know, pornography or a death threat or something that's just unacceptable. And you can use collaborative filtering to solve that problem. And you can be no biased in that if a new person comes and creates 10,000 anonymous accounts or 10,000 new accounts, they have zero trust to start with, and therefore cannot even communicate with your social network. You know, they can't go in and just drop some horrible comment, or, you know, and you get a lot of that, right? And until they have at least gained a small amount of trust by somebody upvoting something that they've written.
But then they have to have contributed something that was visible to other
right.
people.
And so you might have to let them in, give like sort of a trial, you know, or a new account at least, or maybe not. Maybe it has to be invite only.
But if you do a trial per account, then you can still create 1 million accounts, and then you have
that's
a
true.
million trials. So
maybe it will have to be, you know, it has to be invite only at least to get into the system.
Yeah, there are many possibilities.
But then what you have is you're perhaps having these arguments within your social network. And any sort of scoring is actually relative to you personally. The probability, for example, that people that you tend to think are reasonable, or people that they tend to think are reasonable, what's the probability that they would agree with this claim given the arguments that have been presented so far? And that number would be different for different people.
Yeah, that's also something you could attack, basically, because, okay, I try to create accounts that have similar agreement than people with high reputation.
And yeah, I think there might be defenses against that attack, especially if reputation growth is linear, but decay is exponential. So you have to do a lot of pretending. You have to, which is useful work, you know, being reasonable in order to gain reputation, and you can lose it very quickly.
Interesting. Yeah. So you continuously have to do good actions to stay in the game.
And if you do a bad action, you can get your trust back, but it takes time, but you lose it quickly.
Yeah, there's some things I like there, definitely. I'm a bit weary of asking people to be continuously involved to keep their trust. I mean, it seems to me that it should be, we should not discourage bursty behavior too much.
Well, maybe it's not a question of time so much as if the last action that you took was very negative.
Yeah, that I totally totally approve of. Being the time bothers me a bit. Otherwise, I agree. But one thing also is that trust should be per domain, like the liquid democracy principle, right? It's you can be very trustworthy on a certain issue and not on another, and so on. But there are transversal skills, and especially if we're speaking about being skilled at rational, like the formalization process, or putting argument curation, that should be a transversal skill.
Yep.
And being able to do accurate representation of someone else's arguments, accurate formalization, unbiased, that should be a kind of transversal skill. You're trusted to represent other people's arguments well, whether you agree or not with them. But that's the whole thing. There are also per domain, you know what you're talking about in this domain.
Yeah, but that's still an open problem in my thinking as well, because people can create new domains, and then
yes,
what is it like if I create a new domain, can I be a bad actor there because nobody else has the expertise there, or like
right.
How there has to be some general reputation thing as well. But I didn't crack that nut yet. I don't know.
The one thing I've been thinking about in a totally different context, it's about growable ontologies, and I think it applies here. Ontologies are too rigid because there's always new categories. Folksonomies for me are too loose because problems like the one you described. So something I've been thinking about is, can we create a kind of fluid ontology server, so you have an ontology skeleton that is agreed upon, and then people can propose new things. And as they get adopted, they become candidates for integration into the skeleton. So the idea is anybody can propose a new domain, but only when there's a critical mass of people adopting that new domain does it become a real, candidate domain. It's an untrusted domain until it's a critical mass of, yes, this is a consensus view, or it has critical mass view, so that it can be.
So one advantage of that, I think, is that often if you have a pure folksonomy, you don't know what tags to use. And if you use a tag, you see someone use some hashtag or something, and so you use it too, but there's only like 3 people on the planet using it. And so that it loses its value. A hashtag or participation in a domain only has value when there's a certain critical mass.
Yeah.
So if you have a process where people indicate interest, I would start using this domain or hashtag or whatever. If other people were, so you do this initial vote, and then the system can, once a vote reaches a threshold, now when you go to go to a subforum or tag something or whatever, it'll start giving you suggestions only of things that have.
I'd make it simpler than that. I'd let people use the hashtag, but then, oh, look, 50 people are using that hashtag. Should that become a category in the ontology? And that is a different status.
It just relates to a category.
It gets, and then you can worry about, okay, well, we have similar hashtags, should we merge them? And again, like asking, then that requires a more formal process. Like merging is like you have to have buy-in from both communities. So yeah, this is talking about the same thing. Concept merging is a huge thing.
Yeah.
And if not, what's the distinction? Can we justify the distinction and so on? But one thing that's key for me is that on the one hand, I'm very interested in having more rational, but I'm also very postmodern in some ways, and that I think that there's different viewpoints, and my interest is comparing viewpoints. So I expect local, like community local mind maps or knowledge graphs. And then how do you bridge them? How do you mesh them? How do you make these mappings between community local knowledge graphs to establish, okay, well, this is the point of comparison. This is the point of consensus. So that becomes supra-community mapping, and this is the point of divergence. And this is the part of the graph where people don't agree.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems very valuable because we have a world where there's divergent epistemologies.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's,
and we need to map out what the divergence is and what is still common.
So
I remember being, a young, more postmodern than I am now, actually, and being so annoyed at the role of mass media in pushing a single hegemonic perspective. And now I realize that it was also making a common ground possible so people could discuss divergence in a way that's become almost impossible now. It's like there's divergences that are really hard to resolve because there's no common point of reference from which to have the conversation. That's a huge problem. And much less aggressively postmodern now is like, we kind of need the common point of view. But still, we need both. It's a balancing act. And right now we've gone too far in that direction.
I've recently read a book by a professor of social science, computational social science, named Chris Bale, called Breaking the Social Media Prism. And he's the one, you might have heard of it, that did this study where on Twitter, where they intentionally, they did a survey, figured out people's political leanings, and then intentionally exposed people to bots that retweeted either liberal or conservative points of view, from moderate to extreme, and then measured the effect on their political opinions. And found that
this book came to my attention 2 days ago. I have to buy and read. I think it's obviously relevant, and he very much is, if I understand well, he's very much arguing for making it more rational.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm curious, what's his way of doing it more rational?
Well, he has not proposed a lot of ideas, but one of the specific ideas, so again, he thinks social media can be designed to be less polarizing. And he thinks it's been irresponsible not to do that. People creating something that is so influential, society should sit down and say, how do we want this thing?
I'm with John Donovan on this.
So one idea, for example, is instead of promoting just engaging content, and that can create some really ugly dynamics. Something's engaging because it's awful, right? And then you say, that's awful, that's a lie, and that's engagement. And
anger and fear drive engagement.
Exactly. He says, so one thing he's proposed is, well, why don't we measure things that have a lot of approval among a diverse audience? Basically measure the common ground.
Which is what I'm saying about, yeah, I agree.
And another thing is avoid the opposite. So if you can recognize that there are people that don't have enough common ground to have a productive conversation, you may actually want to even isolate them, and let them have their conversations over here, and until you at least have a common ground, for example, of what it takes, what the definition of civil, reasonable, good faith conversation is. So
Rawls is interesting on this. He's basically saying in a diverse society where there's not necessarily convergence of values, the way to make the society function is to, he says there's two things. First, make them work on something that is outside of the divergence. Like there's always something, and basically this is a way to build trust.
Yes.
And once you have trust, the other thing that happens that is possible is that sometimes people want the same thing for different reasons. So even if they don't agree on values, on the aims, they can agree on the means and let them find common means or common measures. But you need trust to get to that stage. So that second stage he calls overlapping consensus, and the first stage he calls modus vivendi.
This is John Rawls, the
yeah
philosopher.
Yes.
I just bought his book, Justice is Fairness. I haven't read it yet, but
I didn't either. I know my roles from Heath.
what book is this where he talks about
I would have to
consensus?
get the Heath book and find the quote.
Okay, yeah, maybe I need to read that Heath book.
I think it's brilliant. I think the Heath book is really, really, really worth reading.
All right, what's the name of that book?
It's the one I put in the Slack chat.
Okay, great.
Communicative Action and Rational Choice.
All right, I'm going to put some things in the Slack chat as well.
Sorry, not the Slack chat, the Zoom chat. Apologies. Okay, folks, we're running over the hour.
Yeah, usually we plan for the hour, and sometimes when people have more time, we make it longer, but usually we try to keep it in the hour. Yeah, I also wanted just to say, like, I need to go soon. Yeah.
Same here.
Well,
but yeah, great. Thank you, Jonathan. Was a good intro, I think. And if you have time tomorrow, we can talk about more open problems.
Sounds great. Is it the same time?
Same time, yes. Every meeting is the same time, and it's Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. I can also invite you to the Google Calendar if you want, or give you an iCall link if you prefer that.
Yeah, and I see you post the meeting in the Slack channel.
Yeah.
So I yep, I can make 5 o'clock. Okay.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you, everybody.
Excellent.
See you tomorrow.
See you next time.
Bye.